already. All right, welcome to this episode of Dialing In Decently, and this is Paul, and I'm John, and we bought this very special bean from Square Mile. They bought a lever machine, and James Hoffman on his channel said they were going to do this one-off roast called Grifone that was the best of Italy. And I actually tasted it on the lever machine a few weeks back, and when I tasted it, I went, this isn't that dark. And then the barista kind of giggled and said, nah, it's actually pretty light. So, which is kind of cool about this bean is that they were trying to get what they like about Italian beans, but not roast them dark. The end result is that Paul was working on this bean for quite a bit, so much that it kind of went stale on us. And it's not tasting as good. And I thought, let's make a video because it's a really common thing for us, especially as we mail order beans from all over the planet, that we don't use up our beans while they're at their best. So this episode, we're going to do two beans. We're going to do these, and then these are a light bean, and then we're also going to do a medium dark bean from Hong Kong's Fine Print, which is from the Australian national champion Scotty Callahan, also highly recommended bean if that's your style. So talk us through, what did this taste like and how did it change as it got stale?
So this was, like I said, it was a very exciting blend because it was essentially Square Mile's take on what a good Italian blend would be. And having worked with a lot of blends, I was very interested, hence why I bought it straight away. But as you discovered, it was very light. But that's actually gone in its favor here. And a little disclaimer, it's kind of like sometimes with beans, it really does depend on the type of bean you have, the roast, and that will be in accordance to how well it will age or how well it will lose flavor. So essentially you go through a process of degassing, and also after degassing it comes into oxidation. There's not too much we can do about degassing. But what we can do is preserve as much as we can in the form of the oxidation part. So, if you are buying a kilo of beans, you wouldn't, unless you're, got a lot of people you're sharing it with, it's very unlikely that you're going to drink all that within 2 or 3 weeks. So in the habits of that, I have evolved into, especially in Hong Kong being so hot, is that I try to store them in a cooler environment. It's not uncommon here for it to be 25 plus all the time. So
that's centigrade, folks.
Yes, centigrade, not Fahrenheit. And I find that is the main variable that you can control, which will help preserve a lot of the flavors that you have bought already. And you can think of it another way. You've spent so much money on these beans. People have invested so much time in grading and selecting these beans. It's kind of respectful to obviously look after those beans and get the maximum out of them as well. Mm-hmm. So while we can introduce techniques that you can get a better shot after a certain amount of time, you just have this expectation that it is not going to be as good as it was, but you're still going to be able to get a very palatable cup.
So that obviously the best way to make coffee from stale beans is to have them not get stale in the first place. What I generally do when I mail order, I'm lucky enough to have a vac packing machine, which is what butchers have. And the thing about those bags is that there's multiple layers of plastic. If you buy a normal Ziploc bag, one of the reasons you get ice inside the Ziploc bag is they're not actually moisture proof. So normal sandwich bags or what you might call freezer bags will let moisture through. So getting sous vide bags and buying one of those little $50 US sealers is, well, worth it.
Yes.
What I do usually is I parcel them out in 100-gram doses, vac pack, seal them, and then put them in the freezer. Now, one of the reasons I recommend the $50 sealer and not my butcher's sealer is the butcher's sealer sucks all the air out.
Yeah.
And that is actually quite violent to the bean, is that hard pack. And when you buy beans from, say, an Italian deli, you'll often see that the package is formed to the shape of the beans.
Yeah.
And that's because they hard vac packed it. They sucked all the air out. What that did is it rapidly aged them, but then they didn't age anymore. Now, that's not what we're trying to do to good beans. Mm-hmm. So if you are going to use a moisture barrier plastic, sous vide bags, sealing it at atmosphere is totally fine. It's actually better than pulling a hard vacuum.
I agree, yeah. And that's what I've seen in my own experiments at home. Because we only recently bought a backpack as introduced by John, and I did use to hard backpack it and found that, after a month, you'd find a big drop in quality. So I basically sealed it at atmospheric pressure instead of taking all the air out, and found it is preserving a lot longer, maybe even 2, maybe even 3 months.
So on that topic, I pinged Scott Rayo to ask him about any tips on what to do with stale beans. He didn't have any huge tips other than what we're going to go over here, but he did have a tip about what rapidly ages beans. And he said there's something about flying on an airplane that rapidly ages them. And what Paul came back with is that he's actually been doing a pour over basically as he's in the waiting room before he gets on the plane. So he tastes them at the last minute, and then on the other end, and he's tried various techniques, and what worked best was essentially a plastic seal.
Yeah. So I essentially wrapped it with cling film, double wrapped it, and then obviously put it in another Ziploc bag within another Ziploc bag.
Okay.
So I was really going a bit OTT, but from traveling and tasting it before it went on a flight, I really did feel like it was worth the effort. So if you are traveling and bringing back beans over, make sure you wrap it up.
I think we're trying to prevent the depressurizing. Essentially,
yes.
when you're flying, it's a lower atmosphere, and when you buy a coffee bag, it has a one-way valve on it. And if you have very low pressure on one side, the outside, what's going to happen is the air inside the bag, which was at normal pressure when it was bagged, is going to get pushed out. And you're essentially going to rapidly outgas those beans, which does violence to them. So flying with your beans inside another container is going to help prevent aging. So let's get right to it.
Yeah.
Are we going to pull this as we normally would? Is that what we're going to do first?
Yep, so I've dialed in my original recipe that I used when I first opened this bag of coffee, and it's pretty close to my benchmark, which is just the default with 15 grams in a 15-gram basket. And then just this week, due to the typhoon, obviously we couldn't do it, and that morning I did pull another shot, open the bag fresh, just to see whereabouts it was. And there is a little bit of difference in flavor. So the main flavor difference I've seen is the hazelnut has gone, but the sweetness is still there, and there's still a nice acidity. But yeah, that quite special flavor of hazelnut, which is quite rare, I would say, is completely gone. So this is what I mean by you're not going to preserve everything in there. There will be some degeneration of flavors, but all in all, you'll still be able to draw out a lot of sweetness and some of the sort of more florally notes.
So one of the things that was unusual about Il Grifone is that the hazelnut flavor was present in the bean. It was not something that was part of the roasting process.
Yes.
And so it's something that actually can go away rather easily. Whereas if this had been roasted, say, medium, and given us nutty, caramel, chocolatey flavors, probably those would be more persistent.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And this is just kind of roasting the flavor in there due to the roast level, or preserving the flavors of the origin with a lighter roast. And I think this is kind of in the middle, and it's done a pretty good job. So
I think what's really cool about them trying to make an Italian bean is they took some of the flavors that Italian roasts usually get from a rather dark roast, and they tried to find beans in a blend that had some of those flavors without dark roasting them. So just to let that sink in, it's actually possible to find beans whose origin taste characteristics are kind of similar to what you get from medium to dark roasting, but then you don't obliterate all the other interesting stuff that's in that.
That's right.
So that's pretty tricksy stuff.
Yes, yeah.
And sadly, some of that hazelnut's gone.
Yeah.
So we're going to make a coffee bean here, 15 grams. That's this pile here.
That's this pile on the white grinder. So essentially I've tuned this into the 15-gram shot benchmark that I use when I open the bag. And this is just so John can basically experience what it tastes like now with the original recipe. And then after we've tasted that or got a good shot from that, we will go through what I've changed in order to draw out the most potential out of this bean, being over a month long since we bought it. But if I could just briefly go through the mindset of it, is that even though this is quite a light roast, you're almost using sort of reduction in TDS. So you're almost treating it as if it was a darker blend, because you're essentially restricting how much you're wanting from this extraction. So if we sort of take out how extraction is sweetness at the start, acidity at the start, sweetness in the middle, and then bitter at the end. With an aged bean or a bean that is beginning to turn stale, that middle portion where the sweetness is further reduced, and the bitter portion is extended. So we want to essentially maximize the sweetness, but draw little from the bitterness. So I guess you could say it's like a ristretto shot, but with a light roast, but we're not going as short as a ristretto. And yeah, so it's really interesting concept in that you're doing opposite things to a certain extent with a lighter roast bean. And it's just really interesting to taste in the cup. Mm-hmm. So this is the shot. Thank you very much, John, and we'll extract this in. Hopefully the grind setting will stick. So this is just the normal default profile. Again, this is very close to my benchmark shot, and obviously just repeating on about benchmark shots, we use a benchmark shot in order to get familiarized ourselves with the actual recipe, but also it's easier for you to see what differences you have made or this bean has made.
Now that looks pretty good to me. I mean, it's nice and dripping.
Yep.
It looks awfully slow.
It does.
It's very Italian extraction right now. And Italian extraction will tend to start out quite slow and thick. And you might pull it only 26, 28 seconds, but it's going to have an intense concentration. So I'm kind of surprised that's what you're doing with this bean, because it is on the lighter side.
Yeah.
Was that intentional, or is that just how it worked out?
It wasn't intentional, because actually originally I looked at the roast level of the bean and I immediately had this interpretation, okay, it's going to be at least 1 ml above as it comes out and bottoms out. But actually through tasting, I found a slower flow rate when the pressure rises seems to match this bean a lot more. It just brings out a lot more sweetness and a bit more vibrancy as compared to a faster flow rate.
So that's very Italian in its style. That is, in fact, what Square Mile was doing. I did get to taste it on their lever machine. They pulled it and had a spring, and they were fairly fast shots. I think they told me 26, 27 seconds, and about that much in the cup.
Ah, interesting.
And they were pairing it with their red brick, which they did on their Victoria Arduino machine. I'm trying to remember what they're called. But their 2-group 9-bar machine was next to this one. And I was surprised how much acidity was in this. I would say the red brick was actually a lot smoother.
Really?
Yeah, right. So I'm curious to see if we've done better than they have.
That's really interesting.
Because this is very much, actually I would say the way this pulled, looking at this curve, I'm going to zoom this down so we can see the pressure curve. This is a lever shot. Okay, this is very much like a lever machine shot that they were doing with their classic lever. The difference is that this is a spring lever that was releasing quite slowly. So we went all the way to 8.5 bar. We only went down to 7 bar. Whereas their lever machine probably went down to something like 4 or 5 bar on that. So, I mean, on the nose, this does smell quite Italian.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. It smells like coffee. It's strong, a lot of caramel.
Yes.
But I'm not getting any rancidity. There's nothing unpleasant about this. So immediately, that's a plus. Okay, so that is way better than what they were pulling.
See, I was waiting for you to say, because I was really interested without sort of interfering with what you're tasting.
The acidity is really tamed here, and I saw your surprised face when I said there was quite a lot of acidity on it. I don't know whether, sorry, it was Square Mile's beans at Prufrock Cafe, just to make that clear. I don't know whether they wanted their shots to flow faster because they were just mobbed. I mean, there was a queue so long. And baristas sometimes just want faster flowing coffee just to get more coffee in the cup faster and not for another good reason. I also think it's lacking in subtlety.
Yes, for sure. So what you're probably tasting right now is the spice is dominating quite a lot. And this is what I would notice is quite different from when I pulled it last time. It's not quite earthy, it's just quite full on spice. Okay. And this spice was not tasted originally when I first opened it. It was a lot more nutty, slightly sort of caramelly, almost milk chocolate. But that chocolate is almost gone. It's kind of like sort of cocoa, but is just overpowered by a bit of spice. That's what I'm getting from here.
At Prufrock, I also got red fruit notes.
Right.
Which are nowhere to be seen here now.
Nowhere. Yeah.
Okay, so what would you do to this now? So just to be clear, I would be totally happy to drink this. I would just be a little bit embarrassed at how much I paid for them. Because it's still delicious. I'm enjoying drinking it. I kind of want to put a scoop of ice cream into it. It's that kind of coffee.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say at this point that this is an outstandingly interesting bean. So what would you do next?
So going back to how coffee ages to the the proportions of the sweetness compared to the bitterness, because the acidity will always be there. We essentially want to build up that proportion of sweetness, and one way we can do that is by updosing a little bit. So what we've done in the black niche is that we've set it up for a 16.5 gram shot. So we've updosed it by 1.5 grams, but we're just going to pull it like a couple milliliters less than what we've done here. So this is a straight 1:2 ratio shot. So 15 grams in, 30 grams out. And on there, we've got a 16.5 gram, and we'll probably pull it or stop it around 29.
Okay.
Now,
I'm going to ask you there. So we're putting more coffee in. Why are we pulling it shorter?
Because we just want to be mindful about that bitter area.
This doesn't have any bitterness right now.
No.
So why are you expecting bitterness on this one?
For the reason that we want to reduce the extraction a little bit.
Okay.
But we want to obviously bring out a bit more fruity and a bit more the acid side.
Okay.
So we want to tame that extraction a little bit more.
Is
to
this
make
going to
it
be
pop out.
faster or slower, coarser, finer? What's going on here?
Essentially, the flow rate will be very similar.
Okay, so it's
Just
coarser.
the dose, yes.
You've made this coarser, but rather than having it go faster when coarser, you've updosed a little bit.
Yes.
So the shot should look similar. So I'm going to do something here.
Okay.
This is a feature we can do is we can save this shot here. Okay, and then we can now compare the shot we just did with the new one, and we can see how the curves are different.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of interesting what you're saying. Coarser, you think is going to bring out more interesting notes.
Yes.
Okay.
And as well as the coarseness, we're going to change the bar pressure to a lower bar pressure. And we just want to make sure that, even though we've got a thicker puck, but with coarser grounds, we just want to make sure that, obviously it's coarser grounds, so the puck integrity will be a little bit less. So we just want to treat that puck a bit more gently with a lower bar. So I'll change that profile now. And so previously it was at 8.6, so I've just done it 1 bar lower. And for the...
This still just smells great.
Yeah.
But it really smells Italian. It smells kind of like not dark chocolate. It does taste like, not like milk chocolate.
Yeah.
It's not like a dark roasted one. It doesn't taste sweet, it doesn't taste milky, it doesn't smell rather. It's a whole lot of complexity of chocolate, and maybe some red fruit down the nose.
Yeah, I get like a skin of a red berry.
Yep. Like a cranberry or something like that. I would love to taste that.
So one thing I haven't mentioned as well is one technique that I've started to use on the DE1 to bring out more acidity is actually also change the flow rate in the pre-infusion. So I've bumped it up by 2 mLs a second. So it's from 4.5, it's now at 6.5. And what what happens in your shot is the acidity just gets a little bit more juicy, and you also gain a slight bit more in body, which is really interesting. Okay. So not change anything with the temperature, just a little bit less on the bar and a faster fill rate on the pre-infusion, and we will stop it around 29. Okay. So I've already tuned this in prior to this starting, so hopefully this setting will stick, and we will taste this shot to see if we can improve it further, but I'm quite expecting the fruit to pop out a little bit more.
Okay, we are Still sort of the same flow rate. Looks like I didn't do something right in saving that God shot, so we aren't comparing to the previous one. Sorry about that. But I don't see any channeling. It's coalescing into one, but even then it wasn't spraying. Yeah, a fairly slower shot. And we're ending at 25 seconds. So actually that's 26, 28 seconds would be kind of a normal Italian one, since we pulled this a little shorter.
Yep.
So definitely the Italian notes, right? That chalkiness is hugely tamed in this one now.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
So now I'm smelling it before I split it because I won't be able to split the crema evenly. And I'm going to do injustice to the shot in splitting it. All right, this is way more like what I drank at Prufrock.
Oh, okay.
So the acidity is
It's pretty high.
is pretty high.
Right.
And also what I remarked at Prufrock was not much body. And this doesn't have much body either, not much thickness in the mouth. But it's far more interesting.
Yes.
And also a lot of the Italian characteristics, I kind of mocked them at Prufrock. I was like, this does not taste Italian at all. Right? And I think actually what happened is that the people who made this roast made it so that if you pulled it like we just pulled it at first, it's totally Italian. And then they went to Prufrock, where they have these quite good baristas who are like, we don't want any of that stuff. We're going to make this flow faster. We want more acidity. We want more complexity. So they took their Italian roast style and they turned it into a more third wave style.
All right, yeah.
That's super cool, though. They got both styles out of one bean.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, that was immediately what I thought. Oh, they've chased a third wave acidity level. And you know, it's very apparent what they've been doing if that was what you were tasting.
So what else are we tasting here? Besides red, there's with the brighter acidity, I don't get tropical fruit, but grapefruit maybe, or lemon, orange,
yeah, I would
something
get
like that.
more of a grapefruit pith,
Okay.
less of the pulp for sure, and it's kind of a bit limey. So it's more it's like, you know, when you kind of eat the zest and it leaves that sort of bitter golden taste in your mouth. It's a little bit like that. So it's not quite bitter, but it's got sort of that citrus pith sort of bitter.
So what's kind of funny is the plan at this point was to switch to fine print because this bean is, when I had it, was quite light, and instead, I'm kind of like, should we bother? Because what Paul's done is kind of what I would do. There's a difference though, which is I haven't got any unpleasant flavors in either of your pulls. So the two shots that he's pulled, both were yummy. One was more Italian style, the other one was more third wave style. I kind of want to go to the fine print because the older beans, in my experience, start to develop unpleasant flavors. And that's where I want to go. But before we go to that, I know that there is a question.
Yeah, Stefan is asking. He says, I figured that my stale espresso light medium started gushing through and channeling like mad. Grinding finer introduces unpleasant flavors. What can I do about this?
Okay, so the question is, when it starts gushing like mad as it gets older, you start fining it, and then you can get unpleasant flavors, which are probably over extraction, because the finer you grind, the more you extract. Myself, I would have updosed instead of grinding finer.
Yeah.
And a really common thing is if my beans were dialed in for, say, 15 grams in the shot I light, as the shot got faster, as the beans got older, I don't touch the grind. I just add a little bit more coffee beans to it, like 0.3, 0.5, 1, 1.5, and hopefully by the time I'm at 16.5, the bag is done.
That makes sense. That's a really good way of doing it.
Okay.
Actually. Yeah, because you're not complicating things with the grinder. You're just, updosing and letting the puck depth kind of do its thing.
There's another aspect to that strategy, which is, especially on the niche, I have found certain magical grind settings where, like, at exactly that grind, it just goes pop. The flavor is so good, and you change it a half setting, and it's nowhere near as good.
Yeah.
And so, if you manage to find that magical grind, just change the flow rate of your shot by up or down dosing. Don't change the grind itself. I haven't found that to be the case with a large flat, just on this.
Yeah, I think that's just the way the grounds are ground, and it just gives you that bit more of a buffer on the niche as opposed to the flat burrs with its weaker puck integrity. So, but I did read on one of the YouTube comments about the variable RPM, which I thought was really interesting and was something I didn't know about. And I guess you could use a faster RPM to build up the fines. To get a stronger puck, so you could try that.
That actually is something probably worth talking about, which is with the larger flat, as your beans get older, it's more likely to fall apart quicker, right? Because puck integrity was always a challenge. Moving to a grinder that gives you a lot more fines is a way to fight that. You're going to have less clarity, but you're not really pursuing clarity if your shot is falling apart and channeling.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Great. So where are our fine print beans and how far out of dial are we?
We're pretty out of dial,
Okay.
and I'm going to go grab some fine print beans.
All right, let's not do that. Actually,
Okay.
because I'm going to not break the episode up because really I would say what you just did is what I would normally do. The only difference is that I tend to pull my shots at a 2.4 ratio, so 15 in, 36 out.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so there's two things I do as the beans go stale.
Yeah.
One is I updose to keep the flow rate where I want it.
Yep.
And then I start pulling back on how much I extract. So
Right.
1536 when the beans are really fresh, when they're really good, 15 in, 40 out.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And by the time those beans are getting stale, I'm as far as 28 grams out.
Okay.
And I'm just cutting them short, and they can be 22, 23-second shots.
Yeah.
And I know to do that when I start getting these sort of stale flavors that are a little bit like, I know it's like stale cardboard versus wet cardboard versus fresh cardboard. It's like a fresh cardboard. It isn't the baked flavor of wet cardboard that just hits you. It's just like, and the stale flavor for me really is pronounced like 10, 20 minutes later. Both the fresh and the non-fresh can taste good as I drink them, but when I'm back at my desk later on, I notice I have an unpleasant flavor in my mouth.
It's that lingering sort of aftertaste that you're.
Yeah. And boy, cutting basically 4 grams out the output until I get to a point where I'm okay with the flavor.
Yeah.
That's how I cheat.
Well, I wouldn't say it's cheating. I say it's getting the right out of the bean. So
And there's one other thing I'll tell you I do with stale beans, because when we go to trade shows, all these roasters come by and they give us their beans because they want us to demo them at the booth. Because of course they're trying to sell beans. So I go home with, 8, 10 kilos of beans. And what I do is, those are all light roasts, expensive stuff, is I make allongés and espressos, and then I make ice cream from that. So it's another thing to do is when your beans are getting old, I tend to make faster flowing shots that then don't have defects in them, but they have higher acidity.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Higher acidity, no defects, I can fix with a healthy amount of cream and sugar.
Yeah, that's very true. And if they are going to the point where they're a little bit too old, you can make like stuff like dip your coffee beans in chocolate and make confectionaries out of it. Don't
or
waste
cake.
it. Yeah.
But seriously, when you have coffee ice cream and you buy it, it's almost always with dark roast coffee. And the flavors actually don't meld right? All the kind of rancidness of the coffee bean just comes out, and you smell stale coffee. If you have never made ice cream from light and ultralight beans, you totally should, because all the flavor complexity is still there, the acid bite. So that's one of the things I would say with stale beans. And of course, try not to have them stale in the first place.
Yes, that's the real truth. Is try not to get them stale in the first place, or treat them with kindness and store them properly. Or at the very least, you can milk and sugar them. But in all fairness, you shouldn't really buy, unless you're really experimenting or honing your skills, you shouldn't really buy more than you use anyway.
Right. I have, with the medium dark beans, gone to this sort of profile and pulled like 45-second shots that were still 2-to-1.
Right.
And what that did is it muted everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All I had was the flavor of the roast. I just had this nice caramelized chocolatey flavor and zero complexity, but nothing nasty either. If you enjoy lattes or any other kind of milky drink, nothing wrong with that kind of drink with those kinds of beans, that kind of style.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to add?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. Thanks for joining us, and tune in next time.
See ya.